Welcome everybody to Best Foot Forward, how to sell yourself at the interview. We're delighted to welcome you today. Apologies for it taking a little while to let you in, a few technical issues that we had to resolve. It's now nearly 3 minutes past 4, so I think what we'll do is make a start and we'll continue letting people in as and when they join us. So welcome everybody. Oh, let's see. No, how is this going to, here we go. Moving on, right. So some housekeeping issues to begin with then. If you should all be on silent, and if you could leave it that way, please. We will use the chat for comments and questions at the end. We've disabled chat for the duration of the presentations because we found last time that actually there was some great activity on there, but it competed with what the speakers were saying. So we decided to take away that distraction. So make a note of anything you'd like to ask. We'll open up the chat towards the end when we get to Q&A, and we'll take your questions from there. Please ensure the name you show is the name you booked with. We like to check people in and make sure we don't have anybody attending that shouldn't be with us. The session is being recorded and you will receive a link to this after the event if you wish to see the event again. And also our speakers will be giving their contact details in the chat box at the end of the session in case you'd like to get in touch with any of them. And then last but not least, we have a survey link for you at the end of the webinar, as we would love to hear your feedback on today's event and also your ideas for future events. So today, I'm your chair, I'm Amanda Whiteford, and I'm a member of the CIPD Essex and Ipswich Branch Committee. We have Susan Curran here from Mosaic Recruitment, Daryl Hughes from Whitelist Talent, and Emma Cannon from Reed Global Recruitment. So welcome speakers, lovely to have you all here. So we're going to start off with how to prepare for the interview, and I'm going to hand over to Daryl to cover this section for us, followed by how to identify your key selling points. So over to you, Daryl.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone joining us this afternoon. I've got a 5-minute slot to speak about something that I could waffle on for about 30 minutes, so I tried to keep it as concise as possible for you. So the first part that I always talk about with the research, I know we've researched the organisation, but I think it's really crucial to actually research the job description and examine it and make sure that you completely understand everything on there. If there's sometimes different companies will use different terminologies for the same word as your business, Google it, ask a friend, ask a colleague. Your recruiter should know, but just I like people to feel completely comfortable in everything that's on the job spec before moving forward with it. The first part of our research, I believe, should start on LinkedIn. There's a wealth of information on there. You can go to the company page, look at the company employees. There may even be a mutual connection there, someone you've worked with in the past. A great individual to ask if they're working at that business, to get an insight of what they're really about, what they like to work for, and what the hiring manager may like to see from the individual joining the business. You can take a look on the individual interviewing you if they have a profile as well. Have a look at their background, so you know you can look at if they've got the same qualifications as you, whether they've gone to the same uni as you or worked in similar organisations. They may have worked for one council when you've worked for another council. It's a great rapport building exercise to have that when you know that about that individual. On the company website, you get even more information, from the culture to the mission statement to the values. When you look at values on a company website, typically employers will look at the values and they will ask questions around them. So if there's some that match, make sure that you've got good answers for how your value matches what their values are. On their website, you've got the About Us section. We all know one of the first questions you get asked at an interview is, what do you know about us as a business? So make sure you've got an understanding of when the company was set up. Is it family run? It might be private. It might be privately owned. It could be, there's many things it could be. Just make sure you've got an understanding of where you don't need to be exact. The interviewer wants to see that you've done some research and you're interested in the opportunity with them. So having a look at what their products may be or what services they offer, a great way of giving you further insight to what they're like as a business, and it also helps firm up in your mind how interested you are in that organization as well, to make sure it's something that you feel like you're part of something really good. Away from the company website, LinkedIn, I also advise to just research the company on Google. So type the company name in, then click the news tab. On that, you typically will get bundles of information from news, press article, press releases, whatever it may be. Some good, some bad, but it's good to get a feeling what that organization's about. Another part, lots of HR professionals typically wouldn't look at are company accounts, and some people might be thinking, why is that relevant? Well, if I was the interviewer and I was a finance director or a company director, and you've taken a look at the company account, you're doing more than what 90% of the rest of the HR professionals are doing. So it just helps set you apart a little bit more in a marketplace that's really difficult. Really, your knowledge can really shine through here. And, you know, if you're talking about, oh, I've seen the company, the turnover's increased by 20% year on year, that's fantastic. And they will want to talk about that as well. And they feel good. So then naturally the meeting will feel good. I think I've got on there Glassdoor. Yes, Glassdoor. So I've put Glassdoor on there because lots of people are talking about it at the moment. My advice would be to take it with a pinch of salt, Glassdoor, because lots of people leave organisations and the first thing they do, they go to Glassdoor and they slag off management or working hours, whatever it may be. We can always look at the bad in a business once we've left. So do take it with a pinch of salt, unless it's like a 1-star rated business and every point is exactly the same. You may want to bring it up if you feel completely necessary. Travel arrange. Sorry, I'm talking quite quickly because I'm trying to squeeze this all into 5 minutes. So apologies to the listeners. Travel arrangements. Again, know where you're going. If you've got your sat nav, yeah, that's great to get you to the location. But if you're in a business, the business is in a business park and it's got 100+ businesses, sometimes it can be quite tricky to find where that business actually is and where you can park. So do a test run if you can. Questions, preparing your questions. So what I want you to do before, or sorry, it was the page before, I've not onto that section just yet. So some of the key questions that I've wrote down could be, how could I impress you in the first 3 months? That shows you're eager to make a positive contribution to the organization. Or where do you think the company is heading in the next 5 years? This should give you an insight into the company's progression plans, general idea about job security and any major up and coming projects. What's your timeline for making a decision and when can I hear back from you? Giving you that expectation of when you can hear back and when you could potentially chase the feedback up, and gives you that time to know when you get in. My favorite question that I always used to like to ask when going for interviews was, is there anything that concerns you about my application, my CV, my background for being a fit for this role? And with the answer you get from that, if they say, no, you've answered everything we need, perfect. You can walk away knowing you've done a brilliant job. If they say, oh, actually, we've got a little bit of issue, we're looking at someone with some L&D experience, you've only put a very small amount on your CV, we're not sure if you're strong enough. That gives you a chance to take that oppression away from them. If you've got lots of L&D, but you've tailored your CV for a role that doesn't talk too much about L&D, it gives you an opportunity to really show them why you're right for the role and debunk any myths or fears that they may have. So we're going to move on to understanding your key selling points and how to put them across. I like to take the approach of a marketer here, looking at yourself as a product and the client being a customer. We know some products, people are all marketing little substance. We all know someone like this. This is not the approach I'm recommending. What I'm talking about is knowing what your strengths are and communicating them in a memorable and persuasive way. So where we're running with a metaphor as you as a great product and the interview as a marketing opportunity, let's look at how you approach this. I like to look at it as 3 steps. So the first step would be analysis. Any good marketer understands the value of market research. Who is your target audience? What are they looking for? What does the competition offer? How can you, the product, solve the customer's problem and or improve their life? take a good look at the job spec. Where are you a great match? Which of the top requirements do you bring to the table? You know, have you got some really impressive achievements that can separate you from the pack? You really need to look at what's going to differentiate you to anyone else that's going for this role. Understand what the client is looking for and emphasize how you specifically fit these needs. You know, I get it's difficult to analyze yourself, especially if you've been job hunting for a while, because it is a tough market at the moment and you could be feeling bruised. This is where speak to a recruiter, speak to a mentor, speak to a friend, because we all can help with some objective feedback on what you can emphasize and what to downplay. Once you've got these, you need to look at framing these selling points. So based on the analysis you've done, you should have a good sense of the key selling points, what the interviewer would be most interested in. So once you've framed these, you can then communicate these powerfully. So sit down, list your top selling points. What do you want your interview to remember about you? Aim for at least 5 points. From these 5 points, they can be level of expertise, key achievements, education, soft skills, personality qualities, or other strengths. For each of these, write a proof statement. I've got an example selling point here for management skills experience. I'm going to read it out just in case people are just listening, not actually watching. So this be for a management role. You want to demonstrate that you can successfully lead others. If this is one of your strengths, highlight it with specifics. So in my current role, I've built a great team that has grown from 3 to 14 over the 5 years. Early on, I learned a lot from my mentors about how to hire the right people and coach them to success. Now I'm proud to say that my team has been acknowledged as the most productive and cohesive group in the division. Now my bosses send young managers to me to mentor. You know, that feels powerful, and it will help show them that your bosses really acknowledge the work you're doing. Next point I've got on there is stick with facts. So instead of stating an opinion about yourself, which can sometimes feel a little bit awkward, present some nice objective facts that demonstrate your point. These are really loose points, not necessarily specific to HR, but so instead of I'm a very strong manager, try I've been published in magazine X and Z on how to effectively manage teams during the COVID crisis. You know, just an example, quoting somebody else. Sometimes this can feel less braggy to quote someone else's positive opinion on you. Truthfully, this approach can really lend additional credibility, even if you feel comfortable in blowing your own horn. So instead of I'm a very effective product manager, my manager told me that I'm the best project manager at the company, and the CEO specifically requested me to lead on a system implementation. You know, slightly more powerful, slightly more effective, so the interviewer really understands what you're about. And I think the process of writing down your speaking points will make a tremendous difference. Look, guys, wrapped out a lot quicker than what I was planning to do, but my contact details are there. We'll have some more time at the end as well, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and we can go over these in a lot more detail. But I know we've got some wonderful speakers coming up as well with Susan and Emma.
Thank you very much, Daryl. That's brilliant. Thank you. So yes, moving on to Emma next. Emma, we'd like you to talk about interviewers' concerns, really addressing those. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. I think we'll end up having a little bit of crossover again, like last time. But yeah, the main thing to bear in mind from my point of view is preparation and honesty. So, you know, most people will know what their own personal elephant in the room would be if there are any issues. We do seem to have a bit of a top hit list when we come through CVs, and they're normally the ones that for us as a recruiter, we manage to cover off before they even get sent through to the client. So it's easier in that respect. But when you're going it alone, you've applied directly, obviously you'll be the one having to answer whatever that elephant may be. Wherever possible, just have a little bit of faith that it's whatever it might be, whether it's a gap on your CV or you might be overqualified, the recruiter, the interviewer is still requested to interview you. So have a little bit of faith in your own skill set. So if it is where you've applied directly and you've had the opportunity to send an email or a cover letter, wherever possible, be prepared to reference it in there. You don't have to go into War and Peace, and there's quite a lot of advice online about what detail and what spin you can put on things. So if you have got something that's not on one of these top issues that I've put on the side, don't be afraid to just use a bit of Google or speak to recruiters and other people about how to address whatever the interviewer concern might be. So yeah, don't tiptoe around it. If it is a gap in your CV, make sure you know you don't have to include all your experience. So if it was a number of years ago that you've had a gap, think about just whether you could get rid of it through formatting. Say it was a gap of several months. If it was several years ago, you could just put the years in there, because it's almost a bit of a non-issue if it's a gap that was quite a long time ago. If it's a more recent gap, yeah, just state in there briefly what it is. Again, your CV is not the place to go into War and Peace about what the reason is. Save that for your cover letter or at the interview, but just do reference it off, and that way you're not having to use up that precious space on your CV. Be honest as well. So whatever it is the gap may be, you know, hiring managers do this for a living. Acknowledging and explaining the gap won't harm your chances of the employment, but lying about a gap it'll come out, whether it's at references or, you know, there'll be some stage. So, you know, just be honest if it's a reason that you've left a job because it's not worked out for you. You know, as long as you've got tangible reasons, let them know. Gaps in your CV, if it is where you've been job hunting, be proactive during that time. You know, if you can reference that you've taken a course or some voluntary work or some professional mentoring for, you know, mentoring somebody else or to get somebody to mentor you. Either way, it's just showing that you've used that time proactively. And be positive. Don't be embarrassed about gaps on your CV. So, you know, you wouldn't necessarily say, I couldn't find a job. You could say, you know, I decided to take a few months off and I wanted to make sure the next role I took was right for me as well. It sounds a lot better than I couldn't find a job. Be prepared as well. So use the pre-interview time, your research time, to prove that it's not affected your passion for your industry. So again, make sure that you've practiced your response and that you've caught up with whatever's going on in that either industry that you're applying for or within the HR world. Other reasons that we get to see is traveling. So don't obviously say I spent 6 months traveling, so I'm not ready to settle down anywhere yet and I don't remember most of what I've done. Obviously talk about the good bits and where you've worked and done proactive positive things. If the reason's family issues, again, don't say I've had personal issues that I'm not prepared to discuss. You can just give a top line. You've been caring for a sick relative, and yeah, you're now in a position to return to work because the health has recovered. If it's your own personal reasons for sickness, again, don't say I've got a recurring health problem, it's made it difficult for me to hold down a job. You can say I have had a recurring medical condition, but again, I'm back to full health and ready to take on a new challenge. And again, redundancy. So if it's redundancy, people will want to know what the company reason was for making you redundant, whether it's mass redundancies or, you know, they've gone through scorecards. So there might be some investigation around that. So again, don't necessarily say my previous companies had it in for me and I was the, you know, first in, whatever the reason is, you know, make sure it's positive. So yeah, unfortunately my employer was forced to make a series of budget cuts, and if it was a first in last out policy, explain that was the reason, and again your CV should explain that. So, you know, whatever the gap is or the reason for the issue, don't be embarrassed about it, and don't try and hide it, and just be prepared to cover it up. So moving on to location. So if you don't drive, cover off how you'll get there. Explain if you've traveled to other job locations that have also been difficult, how you've got there. And, you know, we get it a lot where we'll say, oh, but, you know, you live, it's a long journey, it's an hour. And they'll say, well, I've been driving to a job that's an hour and a half for the past 2 years. So, and again, it'll just reassure them what the issue is. And again, with distance, if you're quite a long way away, it might be because your partner lives locally, or yeah, so don't be frightened if location could be an issue as well. So moving on to tell me about yourself. So that's the next slide. So a common opening question, mainly because the interviewers want to know about you, but obviously it's a bit of a it's giving somebody, it can be quite scary because the interview's just then swung over to entirely the onus is on you. So I feel that a good answer would be 2 or 3 minutes long, briefly cover your education background if relevant, your interest in the field that you're applying for, what your most recent work history is and your experience in that matter. To start that, yeah, I was born in 1978 and I was a precocious child. I don't think that's what people would be looking for. So another typical one that, yeah, I don't like is either what are your strengths or what are your weaknesses. Use this to yeah, whether it is a strength or a weakness, but just acknowledging what you do might be that you can leave things to the last minute, but just turn it into a positive and say that you thrive working to a deadline, and just make sure you've got some of those stock answers. So yeah, your weaknesses, what you've tried to do and how you're trying to address it and turn it into eventually a strength. Don't try and be glib and put in some comedy answer as well. Why should you get this job? This is your unashamed pitch at being able to put in your sales pitch. Just yeah, again, we don't want war and peace as your background circumstances as to why you actually need the job, but you need to explain why that job is right for you. And again, link it back to strengths and competencies that are within the job description. Salary expectations. This one is, yeah, really tricky. We get either people going in and massively over egging what the job was being advertised for and pushing the luck, or we get that it's totally hidden and really nobody likes to address this one. Just if you're not sure, you obviously need to look at what the average salaries are for similar roles being advertised. You can use the websites to do that, or just giving a bit of a range. You don't have to give an exactly pounds and pence answer, but yeah, you need to go in with probably your middle figure of what you'd ideally look for, and hopefully you'll get to the answer that you want. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Again, another favourite. All of your answers, just tailor them to the organisation and the position you've applied for. Again, if you want to say, well, I'd like to be an astronaut, or it's just not suitable. So be passionate about the industry. You don't have to specifically say somebody's specific job, but you could just say growing within the organisation, helping to contribute more to, to how the business is growing, and be a successful member of staff is probably along the right lines of where you want to go. Do you have any questions? That's also a good one. So basically always make sure you've got some questions. Again, loads of lists that you could ask, loads of questions that you could ask on this one. But again, don't just say no. It can be awkward sometimes if the questions have all been answered. So yeah, just try and give yourself several questions that probably aren't likely to be answered. Why do you apply for this position? That's another good one as well. So again, very similar answer to why you want the job, and also what's your dream job. Again, just use a bit of common sense about how you apply for that one. Again, feel free if anybody wants to contact me for advice. I'd be more than happy to help, and my contact details are on the screen and they'll be sent at the end, I think. Thank you.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Emma. Right, moving on then to Sue Curran from Mosaic Recruitment. Sue's going to talk to us about competency-based interviews. So over to you, Sue.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Emma Cannon for introducing me to the group, and then to thank Dawn and Amanda for inviting me to participate in this session. My first slide is going to be talking about competency-based interviews, which I know sometimes can be a little bit of a minefield and fill people with dread. However, I always advise candidates to think about this positively and to consider it as an interview that has been designed specifically to enable them to talk about their experiences and to enable the interviewer to gain an opportunity to gain factual information and evidence of their ability. So a well-constructed competency-based interview will provide the interviewer with an insight into the capabilities of a candidate, coupled with an in-depth understanding of what the interviewee perceives as excellent. Moving on, when people talk about competency-based interviews, they usually talk about the STAR method of interviewing, and basically what that is, it's just a style of or a way of structuring your answers. So we want to start by looking at the situation. So we want to briefly set the scene, paint the picture. Secondly, describe the task. What do you need to do? Then we want to move on to your actions. What action did you take? So talk somebody through the steps you took to manage the issue in hand. And please remember, when you're doing this, talk about I rather than we, unless it's a team-based question. I've had candidates that have failed interviews because they've talked about we the whole way through, and at the end the interviewers really struggled to determine what part they played in those scenarios. So make sure you refer to I and think about what you did, what part you played, rather than what the team did or what we did. Lastly, most importantly, we want to know what was the result of your actions. What happened? What was the solution? You've talked about the problem, you've talked about the action, what was the outcome? Did you continue to monitor or follow this up? So when you're doing all of this, you want your answers to be comprehensive enough for the interviewer to understand the situation and what your course of action was, but you also want it to be succinct. So although that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, you want to keep it simple. Make sure that when you're talking through, people can actually understand. I've had people that have talked through scenarios and at the end I've forgotten what they said at the beginning because it's become so complicated. So I would always say keep it simple. So what we want to think about next is how do we succeed in this type of interview scenario? And I believe with competency interview, preparation is going to be absolute key to your success. So if you're working with a consultancy, talk to them about the interview, the process, gather as much information as you possibly can, find out as much as you can about the structure of the interview, because everybody will have a different take on competency-based interviews. Who are the interviewers? What are their backgrounds? What's important to them? Can we find out a little bit about them? Are the interviewers friendly? Are they very formal? Let's get prepared. If someone's going to be a bit po-faced, we want to be prepared for that. What are the approximate number of questions that they're likely to ask? So is it going to be 10? Is it going to be 15? So we know where we're at in that structure. Can you find out anything about the type of questions that have been asked? Do the consultancy know about what type of questions that have been asked in the past? And are there any general tips that they can give us? So use your consultant to get as much information as you can, because this is going to be key to your success. I'd also suggest that you consider the type of organisation that you're interviewing for. What's the culture within that organisation? A charitable organisation are going to have a very different culture and value than a corporate company. So what they're going to look for different attributes. They may value integrity, empathy, resourcefulness. So make sure you're preparing your answers accordingly. Study the job specification, ensure you have a really, really good understanding of what the role is so that you can determine what competencies are likely to be required for this role. I would suggest you list the competencies, so pick them out of the job specification and prepare an answer for each one, so that when you're preparing your answers, make sure that you prepare answers that portray your skills, your commitment, and really are going to show your attributes in their best light. You may also want to consider what are some of the standard or core competencies that people will generally tend to ask. So these might be things like teamwork, decision making, dealing with difficult situations, working under pressure. So think about the best examples for each competency. The more unique and interesting, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Practice your answers. This will ensure that you're not going to be caught off guard in the interview. And other things to consider: general interview preparation. Be prepared for the unexpected. Don't get so wrapped up in the competency-based interview that you fail to carry out your standard preparation. There's a couple of notes as well. If ever you're asked a question and you feel that I haven't actually experienced this situation, explain that. Say to somebody, I've not been in this situation, however, if I were, this would be how I would deal with it. So there's a wealth of information online regarding competency-based interviews, and there are some really good practice sites. So if you're attending a competency-based interview, take a look at the information that is freely available. In conclusion, research thoroughly, prepare your examples, frame them well, and practice in advance. Help the interviewer to remember you by offering interesting scenarios. I always remember a candidate who stood out for her example of excellent customer service by talking to me about how she had actually ensured a farmer received a special variety of feed for his prize pigs during a terrible storm. So it's talking about examples that is going to stand out in somebody's mind. And it's when you're interviewing, I interviewed a lot of people that day, and I remembered her at the end of the day because of the example that she provided. If anyone's got any questions for me later, I haven't put my details on there, but I'm happy to provide them if anybody needs to discuss that in any more detail. And now I'll move on to achievements. Okay, so this is all about putting your best foot forward. It's really going to be your opportunity to make yourself unique, to make you stand out from the crowd. This is the part of the interview where I always feel that people struggle quite often. I would say that once again, this is going to be somewhere where you need to prepare in advance. So think about things like considering the organisation and the job that you're going for, and making your achievements relevant if you possibly can. I conduct a high volume of interviews, and this is the one area that candidates will struggle to give me an answer. And often I find myself cajoling, coaxing to get an answer. I mean, most people are generally modest, and often they're hesitant to talk about their own success. If I was to hazard a guess on percentage-wise, I would say that maybe only 30% of people can come up with a good answer to that question off the top of their head. So for me, this is an area that you're really going to need to have to think and put some work in. As a consultant representing candidates, it's vitally important that I know what a candidate's achieved so that I can represent them and make them stand out. I'd ask you all to consider, if you were a HR manager and you were actually recruiting, think about what you're looking for. And if I was looking for a sales manager and the CV in front of me noted that the candidate had exceeded their sales targets by 150% whilst keeping their retention below the company average, I would be interested in seeing them. So that would be a good achievement to me for the type of role that they're looking at. When you're thinking about the interview, think about your personal achievements as well, the organisation, the culture, the values, and highlight achievements that you value and you think that they would value too. So what are the type of achievements you could discuss? And I think this is where sometimes people get a little bit stuck. I would like to think of these as a combination of work, study, personal, so the interviewer really gets a flavour of you as a person. I'm going to talk through the type of success that could be considered an achievement. As I said, that's what I think people struggle with. So first and foremost, I think work-related successes are what an employer is going to be interested in. So as a HR manager, what are they likely to be? It could be that you've implemented a HR system which led to increased efficiencies, improved employee engagement, won hearts and minds by introducing an employee survey and acted upon the feedback, introduced better training opportunities which led to a higher level of retention, been promoted, won an award, been singled out for service excellence by colleagues or customers. So when you're talking about these, make sure that you make these achievements tangible. If you've improved retention rates, how did you do it? By what percentage, and what did this mean to the business? Did it mean that they saved money? What did it actually mean to them? Did they save on training costs? It may be that you do some charitable work, which is really important to you and you consider it to be a great achievement. So what's that likely to be? You may raise funds for a charitable organisation such as Macmillan. You may, by hosting an annual cake and bake morning or a coffee morning. You may act as an ambassador for a group or an organisation. You may have offered support to an elderly person during the COVID crisis. You may offer your time free to chair on a board, act on the board of governors at the school. All of those things could be considered as good achievements. You might consider your achievements your qualifications. You might have studied for a CIPD whilst you were working full time. You may have been the first in your family to attain a master's degree or a HND. So all of those things could be achievements, and they're tangible achievements that you could talk about in an interview. The extracurricular activities are the ones that probably make you the most unique and the ones for me that tend to stick in my mind. So this is your opportunity to tell the interviewer something about you that they don't already know. They haven't maybe picked this up on your CV, because maybe it isn't something you're going to put on your CV, but things that you might like to mention. You might be an expert gardener who's won the local marrow growing competition 5 years on the trot. You might manage the local football or netball team who are top of the league every season. You might have recently completed the Couch to 5K programme, having never run before. You could have climbed Kilimanjaro or the Three Peaks, or might be an award-winning Latin or ballroom dancer that's going to give Strictly a run for their money. So it's often the extracurricular achievements which are the ones that are going to stick in someone's mind. So it's very likely that you've done lots of things, both in your personal and professional life, that are going to make you unique. And these are the things that you're going to need to be able to talk about with honesty and with conviction. But really have a good think about what you want, how you want to portray yourself, what you do really consider, honestly, to be your achievements. So in conclusion, be confident, be prepared, and be proud to discuss your achievements. Think about this section of the interview as another opportunity to be seen as an individual and to really wow the interviewer. That's it.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Susan. That's brilliant. And now, final point, back to Daryl, to talk about our image, whether it's in person or via the web. So Daryl, over to you.
Helps to unmute myself. This is the thing with technology we need to remember. And when we're on interviews as well, unmuting ourselves, and rather than saying, can you hear me all the time? Look, I'm going to try and wrap this up relatively quickly, because I appreciate we started a little bit later and I overrun earlier on. But also most of you guys probably know the majority of these points and what to do. So I'm going to focus on what I think are the three main aspects when it comes to looking professional and in control. So firstly, we're going to talk about your look. I know we say you shouldn't judge people by what they look like, and I totally agree. But in terms of job interviews, looks matter, so make sure you do get it right. I always talk about dressing the part and making sure that you feel the best version of yourself, because if you feel confident in what you look like, all you've got to worry about is the stuff that you're vocalizing and is coming across. Make sure you wear something comfortable. You don't want to be adjusting yourself every 5 seconds. You don't want to be fidgeting. You know, if you've got a poorly fit shirt, if you're a guy, you know, and you've put on a little bit weight during lockdown, you know, wear something a little bit looser so you feel comfortable. Video, you can get away with these things a little bit more, but definitely in person, make sure, you know, you are looking the best version of yourself. I talk about this when people have got multiple interviews through the day, and that is to take a spare shirt with you, even if you're not planning on eating or drinking. If you're out and about in Chelmsford or London, I don't want to worry you, but there's a chance that someone could spill that coffee over you, and the last thing you want to do is turn up to an interview smelling of coffee and say, "Oh, sorry." So that impression, now remember that they won't blame you for it, but if you've got a spare shirt with you, it's really good. And especially if it's a warm day as well, when you just fancy a fresh change of clothes. This is if you're going for multiple interviews, not for just the one. In person, limit the perfume and aftershave. Don't be that person they remember for the overwhelming scent. You know, like Susan mentioned, you want to be remembered for climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or your marigolds or whatever it is. You don't want to be remembered for overpowering aftershave or perfume. Limiting jewelry. You just want to, this is my personal opinion, you don't want any dangling earrings or anything that really makes a noise. It can distract the interviewing, can distract yourself. I've said cover tattoos. I'm not being anti-tattoos here, because I personally like them. I don't have any myself, but there's lots of places that view them as unprofessional. And I know people at the moment saying, "Oh, well, I wouldn't want to work for someone who doesn't like my tattoos." Okay, I get that. Most places are fine with it once you're in, but if you've got a sleeve, you know, wear a long sleeve shirt to cover it up. It's better to be safe than sorry. Basic points most people do, but I always talk about this because I've met with people that don't. Cut your fingernails, make sure they're nicely manicured. That's more so for the guys in the room that are listening, because I think women are typically very good with that. Make sure your shoes are polished, haircut if needed, shaving. I know, you know, is a lot of on trend of having beards now. If you're part way through cleanly shaving to having a beard, you're probably best to shave it off, because it can look scruffy. My point 2 will be attitude. So you're looking fantastic, you're feeling good, you're feeling ready, but you got to go in that room with the right kind of attitude, you know, one that's going to be received well by the individual or the panel that you're meeting with. So I always talk about things not to bring with you. So, you know, don't have your headphones hanging out when you walk into reception. Don't be chewing gum. Don't bring in your Starbucks coffee cup and things like that. It is something that can be knocked over, and it's something that I don't think makes you look professional personally. Make sure your phone's turned off or on airplane mode, so you don't have anything vibrating and distracting you. Be on time. So most people are fine with this and sort of turning up on time, but as long as you've done your research, like I mentioned earlier on about where the organisation is, there's no reason for you to be late or to be 40 minutes early. You got to get this right balance. You know, if you're turning up too early or late, I think it shows really poor time management. Yes, there can be exceptional circumstances where the A12's absolutely gridlocked and you can't move. There's nothing you can do about that, but normally I advise people, if they are there early, 30 minutes, you know, go for a wander, get some fresh air, clear their head a little bit, just so they're not sitting in their car panicking or thinking about going in. So I aim to go in with about 10 minutes to spare. Distraction, there's multiple distractions we can have, and you know, we want to focus on what the questions the interviewer is asking us and listening to every word they say, rather than I've seen people zone out in interviews before when I've been part of a panel, and you know, it's an hour of your life. You can keep fully concentrated in that period. I've said, don't slag off your old boss and your old company as well. You can give reasons why you left, but don't start ranting about how much you hate your current or previous job. You want to be talking about positives and showing a positive image. You don't want to be seen as that negative individual, because in this market it is tough. I wouldn't employ a negative individual who, if all they did was slag off their previous employer. Could be completely correct, and their ex-boss was a mini Hitler, but you know, you don't need to talk about that in the interviews. Trust yourself, be confident in your abilities. This will show your confidence, you know, and how you can do the job. But again, don't be too confident. You can take it too far, but you just don't want to be coming across as arrogant. And the third point is your knowledge, but that is most of the things that I covered in the earlier slide. So just really quickly, you know, make sure you research the company, research yourself, you know, your CV inside out, you know what you can offer, and think about the questions you are to ask them. So I'm going to wrap off with a final few bits. So practice your speaking. If you've not done a video interview, do a practice mock video interview with a family member. Give them questions that may get asked and you have your answers, and practice. You know, practice really does help. It makes you feel confident, and you know, it can help you really stand out in that interview. If you're going to an interview, my advice is don't call a family friend, or don't call a family member or friend on the way to interview. Some people say why, and I think sometimes you can get bad news and then you're thinking about that on the interview. En route to interview, listen to your favorite podcast, listen to your favorite song. You will feel really, I personally feel really confident and upbeat once I've listened to some good music, my favorite music. So you can do that before going to the interview rather than worrying about it. Take copies of your CV as well. Last thing you want, get to the interview and they go, oh, the admin's off today, we haven't got a copy of CV. That's fine, I've got copies here for you. Again, taking control of that interview and helping it. And last thing, if you're doing a video interview, if you're indoors and there's people in the house, just make them aware. I'm sure you guys do this anyway, but just make everyone aware not to disturb you for the next hour to 90 minutes. And also thinking about your background, what is behind you, what looks good. And you know, where I sit is actually really bad for a video because I get the sun beaming in on my face here. But it's good feng shui apparently where my desk is. So I stick to that. But look, guys, as I say, my details are below. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, message me through the website, give me a call. More than happy to run through all these things in more detail. And if it's just a little confidence boost you need, that's what I love giving people at the moment. I haven't got tons of jobs for people. Many recruiters don't have tons of jobs, but we're all here helping one another and trying to get through this and give people the skills and the confidence to really become the best versions of themselves and put their best foot forward. So thanks for all listening, guys. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Daryl. So question time now. So I'll stop sharing my screen. We'll turn on the chat so that everybody can. There we go. So questions for the panel, please. Type away and we'll see what comes up. Oh, what is Glassdoor?
Do you want to do that, Daryl? Do you reference
no,
that?
Okay. So Glassdoor is a way for employees to give reviews on the organisation they work for. So say, for example, you was going for an interview at Lloyd's TSB, you could go onto Glassdoor, type in Lloyd's TSB, and you will get reviews from people. You probably get sort of 5,000 odd reviews for people, and it will show the length of time they've been at the company and pros and cons to that business. But as I say, Addy, do take that with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't take all of it as absolute gospel.
Great, yeah. Thank you. And another question
sorry, there are also jobs advertised on Glassdoor as well. So if people are looking for jobs and they're looking for another avenue for where there are some jobs, you can look on Glassdoor as well.
Yeah,
sorry, Amanda.
LinkedIn bought it out recently, and it's got average salaries and things like that on there. But yeah, like Daryl said, it's only as good as it's either people that love it or people that hate it. So you get, but it's good for seeing what themes are about companies.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. And another good question, what are your thoughts on cover letters? Are they worth it? Sue, would you like to take that one very briefly?
Yeah, of course. I think that it depends. If you've got a really good personal profile, sometimes that might cover off most of the points, but if somebody writes me a cover letter and I read it and they've made it specifically tailored for that job rather than just a general cover letter, I would value that. So it depends how you're going to write it. If you're going to write a proper cover letter in the respect of the reason that I'm applying for this job and what appeals to me about it, why my skills and attributes fit with the job specification, then I would definitely recommend it. But I don't like the ones where they just done a general cover letter for every job and it turns up and you think there's nothing in that that's really relevant to the job that I'm advertising. I don't know if Daryl and Emma would agree, but often we'll get cover letters that are really general and I don't think they add value. So it's got to be tailored specifically to the job that you're applying for.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Good advice, I think. A couple of similar questions here around, would you avoid mentioning you have young children in an interview? And how do you answer a question about taking maternity leave cover? So kind of linked and quite separate. What are your thoughts on the first one about, I don't know what's behind the taking maternity leave cover. Whether Maggie, you mean, would you be prepared to or not? Any thoughts from the panel or?
With regards to mentioning maternity cover, I don't, like on my CV, I've never mentioned my maternity covers. I don't think it's relevant. I'm still employed. But I know there is a variety of views on that.
Right, okay, so so not specifying that you left the organisation to go on maternity for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't see.
That makes sense. I understand what you mean. And what if we are asked about whether we have young children? I guess that's one of those ones. Is that relevant to the job? Is probably going to be what you would need to know. Why are they asking you the question in the first place? Anybody else like to answer that one?
I think that's dependent on the interviewer. If the interviewer brings up that they've got young children, it's a common ground that you can talk about you having young children as well, but there's no need for it. It's almost as pointless is the wrong word, so apologies, Kerry. You know, when I see people on their CV and they've put married, divorced, 2 young children, and think, you know, these are not relevant things that are going to make a difference for you in terms of getting the job or not getting it. I don't think you need to bring it up unless asked, and only if it's really relevant and the interviewer is talking about that. So, yeah.
And people shouldn't really ask that question. Do you have it shouldn't be asked if they're really discriminating against you. But like Daryl said, it depends in what context it comes up.
Another question, well, it's more of a comment really from somebody around they've been in retail for 24 years with 11 years in managerial roles. They've achieved their associate CIPD but are finding it hard to find an HR role. My thought reading that is really emphasize the management experience and how HR policies and procedures and ways of going about managing people land, because you've got first-hand experience of that. One thing to do it in theory, another thing to know how it lands and then actually implement it. But what do you guys think? Any comments about how you might sort of really highlight, make use of that experience to move into an HR role?
I think maybe if they're applying for jobs, that could be one example of where you would use a cover letter to highlight all of your areas of experience and how they do fit in with the specification for that particular role. So that could be one way, maybe using a recruiter that gets to know you personally so they can actually highlight your skills and attributes. But at the moment, it is a very difficult market. So that might be why the person is finding it difficult, because there are a lot of people that are out there looking for work. So it may not be the norm that would be a difficult transition, but at this moment in time, it's possibly a difficult transition.
Sometimes it's difficult making that switch from salary level when you're trying to get into a slightly different career. I think a lot of people have to go a step down before coming back up again, and that obviously also makes it difficult depending on personal circumstances.
Yeah, Another interesting one here. At the end of an interview, is it worth asking the interviewer what they thought of you, or does that cause unease? What's your thinking on that panel?
Oh, it's brave. Go on, Sue.
I think it would depend on the interviewer. Some people might be really happy to answer that question and be honest with the person, and some people wouldn't. So I think you've got to gauge it quite carefully as to the type of person that's interviewing you. Are they quite formal? Are they quite structured? Are they unlikely to be thrown off by that type of question? Is it someone that you feel you've built a good rapport with, that's quite relaxed, that might give you some honest feedback? I really think you've got to gauge that on the day.
Okay.
I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
Yeah, when I look at that, Joe, that was one of the samples I kind of gave earlier. When you, at the end of the interview, you talk about your application and your CV for the role, and you can kind of take it away from whether they like you or what they thought of you. Because in that point, I absolutely think you should ask it. It's pointless going for an interview and leaving there and not getting any feedback. You know, most clients are happy to give feedback if you've had a really good interview. If they shy away from it, you can maybe read between the lines that it hasn't gone as well. But yeah, absolutely, try and word it in a different way about what they thought of you. But just ask about my application. Is there anything that concerns you? And then they can debunk anything there.
Okay, that's great. I'll choose just one last question for the panel, and then we'll wrap up. And that's, would you mention that you have a disability at interview?
I think it's down to you if you need adaptations needed for your disability. I think Julie might be best placed to answer this one. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, it depends on whether you need allowances to be made because of your disability. Is that right, Julie?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily volunteer it, but if certainly in advance of interviews, businesses should really have asked if there needs to be adjustments for the interview process. But it really depends on the context of in which you're kind of thinking of mentioning it. And the cynic in me would say, mention it if you want to be protected in the future if you don't get the job. But I think, frankly, you don't really want to be in that position of arguing that you were discriminated against. I think you're best not to mention it to start with, would be my view.
So it just leaves me to thank all of our panelists again for a fantastic contribution today. Well done, everybody. And it's been lovely to have you. Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your day and evening. Thank you.
Thank you.